Hey class, today we're going to talk about the growth of presidential power. You see six presidents on the screen before you: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson from the left, and then in the black and white pictures, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Ronald Reagan. Each of these presidents exemplify this idea of the growth of presidential power. Each used their office to expand the powers of the presidency, but how did they do it? And why is it that we continue to see what appears to be a growth in presidential power despite the checks and balances and other constitutional principles that we've already studied? How does this continue to happen? Well, let's look at the structure of the Constitution and contrast the powers of Congress and the powers of the president. Article 1 makes Congress very strong. The 17 enumerated powers that the president or that the Congress has, in Article 1, Section 8, clauses 1 through 17, give Congress the power to do everything from regulate coinage and lay taxes to regulating the military, declaring war, and regulating commerce. In fact, the Commerce Clause, as you well know, has been interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court after 1938 to do for Congress whatever they want to do. It can be justified under the interstate commerce power. Finally, the necessary and proper clause gives Congress, this elastic clause, gives Congress the ability to do whatever is necessary and proper to implement these enumerated powers that they have, these express powers. So if Congress wants to create an internal revenue service, yeah, the Constitution doesn't say it can, but the Constitution says that Congress can lay and collect taxes, and that, coupled with the power to do whatever is necessary and proper to lay and collect taxes, justifies its creation of the Internal Revenue Service, or the power to coin money and the need to make a more a $20 bill that is more resistant to counterfeiting, gives Congress the power to do just that, to order the mint to create a new $20 bill, and so on. Most people argue the founders intended Congress to be the strongest branch of government, and for a very simple reason. It represents the people. It represents the people directly. The House of Representatives is directly elected by the people, and since the 19th Amendment, the Senate has been directly elected by the people. Congress is most responsive to the people, and thus the founders figured, hey, in this republic of ours, let's give the power to the representatives of the people. By contrast, Article 2 of the Constitution lays out for this president 7 enumerated powers that are much more vague. The commander-in-chief power is a powerful thing, but what about the reporting power? What about the power to convene Congress, the power to make appointments? These are much more vague powers. They don't seem to have a lot of direct impact on governance. So how has power of the president grown over the years? Well, one of the big reasons why presidential power has grown is the fact that there's only one president, unity of office. There's only one president who has to make a decision to drive the executive branch forward, to commit to policies that they wish to pursue. Contrast that with 535 members of Congress needing to agree in order to act, or call it a majority of the House and a filibuster-proof supermajority of 60 in the Senate. And you see that Congress, which is set up to be a deliberative body, one based in discussion and compromise and give and take, is not designed to make decisions quickly. The president, by being the singular president, can make decisions quickly, and that adds to their power. That, coupled with the second idea that they're strong-willed. Strong-willed presidents get things done because they have a vision for this country. They have a vision and a set of policy goals that they want to realize. Say what you will about President Obama. He was a strong-willed president that knew what he wanted to accomplish and did it. Say what you will about President Trump. He is a strong-willed president that knows what he wants to accomplish and goes about getting it done. Crises add to the power of the president. Crises like wars or natural disasters scare people. And when people are scared, they want to feel safe. And often they don't mind giving away some of their liberties or some of their freedoms or giving government more power and authority to make them feel safe. We've talked about this balance of liberty and security in our system in class, but it bears repeating again, and also just recognize that the political branches get this. They understand this. This is a clip that I'm going to show you, a short clip of Rahm Emanuel. In 2008 and beginning of 2009, he was the incoming chief of staff for President-elect Barack Obama. He spoke at a Wall Street Journal roundtable and made just this observation.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. I think America as a whole in 1973 and 1974, not my view, but obviously the administration, missed the opportunity to deal with the energy crisis that was before us. For a long time, our entire energy policy came down to cheap oil. This is an opportunity. What used to be long-term problems, be they in the healthcare area, energy area, education area, fiscal area, tax area, regulatory reform area, things that we had postponed for too long that were long-term are now immediate and must be dealt with.
So we have a financial crisis in 2008, and out of it comes banking regulations, and also Obamacare, and also other regulatory changes that had the result of expanding the power of the executive branch. Congressional delegation to the executive branch is also a means by which president power grows. We'll talk more about this in a little bit. Suffice to say that Congress gives away its authority under the Constitution to the president, and believe me, the president is more than happy to take on those powers. For example, Congress has the power to declare war under Article 1, Section 8. Well, through the War Powers Resolution Act, they've largely given that power to the president because it's a hard political call to make. Much better to have a president do it and then react to the president's actions of deploying troops than actually vote to send troops to war. Again, we'll talk more about that later in this video. The simple expansion of the federal government is itself a growth in presidential power. Look, a national government that has 100,000 people working for it is has much less reach than one with 2.6 million people working for it. And so as the national government expands, the president, as the chief executive of the executive branch, is going to enjoy more reach, power, and authority. And likewise, why is the government expanding? Because the people want it to. There is a growing public expectation of government service. The national government is called on to do things that used to be the province of state governments or local governments, or quite frankly, the public or the private sector. What used to be done by, let's say, charitable organizations is now provided for as a governmental service. Well, that means you need a larger government and larger executive branch to implement these ideas. Finally, the president's use of the bully pulpit, whether that looks like fireside chats of FDR or President Trump on Twitter. The ability of the president to talk and speak directly to the people to garner support means that the president can do an end run around Congress and direct influence on Congress from the people that congressmen represent and build a consensus and build support for the president's agenda. Now, I don't want to pretend that there aren't limits on presidential power. Of course there are. But look at the Constitution. Yeah, the enumerated powers of Article 2 are limited to 7 express powers. But presidents have largely successfully argued that they have much greater implied powers through the, quote, executive powers of the president. The first line of Article 2, Section 1, which lays out the privileges and powers and responsibilities of the executive branch, reads, "The executive power of the United States of America shall be vested in a president of the United States." Based on that sentence, presidents have said, look, no, we have implied powers, not just the 7 enumerated or express powers, but also these implied powers. So presidents have said we have the power to set executive orders. An executive order is like a law, except it's not passed through Congress. It is an expression of the president as the chief executive to the bureaucracy, telling them, here's what I want you to do. Okay, and in most cases, these are relatively innocuous directives or orders. These are the orders, for example, from May and late April and May of 2020. Proclamation on Public Service Recognition Week. Intent to nominate and appoint individuals to administration posts. National Hurricane Preparedness Week 2020. The point is, and there's 144 of these executive orders that President Trump has put into place. The point is that they're not always small things that presidents direct the administrative arm of the bureaucracy to do. Here's Saturday Night Live's take on the topic from back when President Obama made an executive order declaring an amnesty or a path to citizenship for millions of undocumented workers by way of executive order.
We now return to a brand new episode of Schoolhouse.
Boy, you really have to climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Say, what's that piece of paper doing here?
Oh, you mean me? I tell you who I am. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. But I know I'll be along someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Oh, what kind of bill are you?
Why, I'm an immigration bill. And one day the Republicans might create me so I could become a law.
And how does a bill become a law?
Funny you should ask. Well, first I go to the House and they vote on me. But then I need from the Senate a majority. And if I pass the legislative bill, then I wind up on the president's desk. And I Put your weapon! My leg! They were made of paper!
President Obama, what's the big idea? That bill was trying to become a law.
I realize that. But you know, son, there's actually an even easier way to get things done around here. It's called an executive order.
I'm an executive order, and I
pretty much just happened. And that's it.
Wait a second, don't you have to go through Congress at some point?
Oh, that's adorable. You still think that's how government works? Don't listen to him, son. Look at the midterm elections. People clearly don't want this. Oh, you black ass! Oh, damn. Oh, wow. Why did I come back? I think I landed on my keys.
Mr. President, is this constitutional?
Of course. Presidents issue executive orders all the time.
That's right. I can do lots of things. I'll create a national park or a new holiday.
Or grant legal status to 5 million undocumented immigrants.
Wait, what?
Yep. Yep, that's what you're going to do.
Oh my God! Well, I didn't have time to read myself. Whoa! Okay, go big or go home, huh? You tip it over. We're gonna take you to court. We're gonna shut down all the cars. Oh, yeah. So many steps. So many steps.
Well, son, what do you think about the government now?
I think I want to go into the private sector.
Me too, son. Me too.
Finally, there's the idea of signing statements. And signing statements are, again, another controversial thing that really emerged during the 1980s when the Reagan administration began stating as an interpretation, when they signed a bill that Congress had passed, they laid out how they were going to interpret that bill. And presidents since then have used this tool to either make a rhetorical statement of a bill about a law that they're signing, saying whether they like it and why they like it or why they don't like it, defining some political interpretation of a maybe vague or ambiguous part of a bill, how they're going to interpret it or order the executive branch to interpret a law, or announce the constitutional position that the president has on a particular bill, and then say whether or not they're going to enforce that questionable constitutional provision. Now, obviously, that's not part of our constitutional scheme, right? I mean, if you don't think something's constitutional, you challenge it in court. But that's not always how things get done. So again, signing statements are vague as to whether they're constitutional. Presidents, again, point to this idea that, hey, we've got these executive powers that give us the ability to do this. So yeah, the Constitution limits presidents' powers, but not nearly as strongly as you would think. Congress acts to limit the president's power, right? I mean, we have checks and balances. We have the impeachment, the power of impeachment. We have the power of the purse, the budgetary power. And Congress fights to defend these powers, as stated by a congressman back in 2014, Trey Gowdy, in the following clip about the prerogatives of the Congress.
Mr. Speaker, I'll withdraw my point of order and rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The reservation is withdrawn and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk for just a moment as colleagues, not as Republicans or Democrats, not as members of the majority or the minority, but colleagues who are blessed to serve in the United States House of Representatives, the People's House, with all the tradition, with all the history, with all the laws that have been passed, with all the lives that have been impacted. I want us to talk as colleagues, because our foundational document gave us, as the House, unique powers and responsibilities. We run every 2 years because they intended for us to be closest to the people. The president was given different duties and powers. The president was given the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is what does that mean to you, that the laws be faithfully executed? We know the president can veto a bill for any reason or no reason. We know the president can refuse to defend the constitutionality of a statute, even one that he signs into law. We know the president can issue pardons for violations of the very laws that we pass. And we know that the president has prosecutorial discretion as evidenced and used through his U.S. attorneys. Mr. Speaker, that is a lot of power. What are we to do when that amount of power is not enough? What are we to do when this president or any president decides to selectively enforce a portion of a law and ignore other portions of that law? What do we do, Mr. Speaker, regardless of motivation, when a president nullifies our vote by failing to faithfully execute the law? How do we explain waivers and exemptions and delays in a bill passed by Congress and affirmed by the United States Supreme Court? How do we explain away a refusal to enforce mandatory minimums that were passed by Congress and affirmed by the Supreme Court? And why pursue, Mr. Speaker, immigration reform if presidents can turn off the very provisions that we passed? You know, in the oath that brand new citizens take, it contains 6 different references to the law. If it's good enough for us to ask brand new citizens to affirm their devotion to the law, is it too much to ask that the president do the same? If a president can change some laws, can he change all laws? Can he change election laws? Can he change discrimination laws? Are there any laws under your theory that he actually has to enforce? What is our recourse, Mr. Speaker? What is our remedy? Some would argue the framers gave us the power of the purse and the power of impeachment, but Mr. Speaker, those are punishments. Those are not remedies. What is the remedy if we want the executive to enforce our work? This bill simply gives us standing when our votes are nullified. This bill allows us to petition the judicial branch for an order requiring the executive branch to faithfully execute the law. Mr. Speaker, we are not held in high public esteem right now. Maybe members of Congress would be respected more if we respected ourselves enough to require that when we pass something, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we had a firmly rooted expectation that when we pass something as law, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we put down party labels and a desire to keep or retain or acquire gavels and picked up the history, the tradition, and the honor of this, the people's house. Mr. Speaker, the House of Representatives does not exist to pass suggestions. We do not exist to pass ideas. We make law. And while you are free to stand and clap when any president comes into this hallowed chamber and promises to do it with or without you, I will never stand and clap when any president, no matter whether he's your party or mine, promises to make us a constitutional anomaly and an afterthought. We make law.
And that's true. Congress does make laws. But what if they delegate their power, their constitutional authority, away to the president for political reasons? Congress has the constitutional power to declare war. And yet, in the War Powers Resolution Act, this legislation that was introduced shortly after Vietnam, and passed, what it does is set up a situation where the president, as commander-in-chief, has the power to send troops abroad without congressional authority for, I believe, 30 days. And then Congress has a set period of time to discuss and then pass a resolution, adopt a resolution to affirm the president's sending troops overseas, and then either set a deadline or otherwise set parameters on this distribution of troops. But that's not a declaration of war. And, you know, we've been involved in Afghanistan, for example, since November of 2001 under a War Power Resolution Act, War Power Resolution that's, 19 years old. And the idea that we haven't declared war, and yet we are acting as if we are in a war, creates this difficulty with this delegation of congressional power. Finally, national emergencies are a delegation of congressional authority. If the president declares a national emergency, then the president can redirect money, for example, to accomplish some emergency that might have been that might have occurred. Sometimes it's a hurricane. Other times it's something like the 1973 OPEC oil price spike that triggered a national emergency that was declared. I believe it was actually declared by the Carter administration in 1977. That's been in place ever since. Okay, so these that's a delegation of congressional power. Congress should be passing laws, not the president acting. Okay, now of course there's one more branch of government we have to be aware of, and that of course is the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, but it's an inherently reactive branch of government. Someone has to go and file a case to get the judicial branch involved. It can't just act on its own to reach out and take a case and say, this is a legal issue that we want to determine the constitutionality of, for example. And of course, we can't forget who appoints U.S. Supreme Court justices and all of the other federal judges, but the president, with the advice and consent of Congress. So again, I guess the question I want you to wrestle with as students in my class, that at some point we will discuss, how should America be governed? Do we want a strong executive branch and a weak Congress? Do we want a strong Congress and a weak executive? Or do we want a strong executive, a strong Congress, and lots of conflict between the two branches of government? We'll talk about these questions and others. I will talk to you soon. Take care.